So, Dr. Helen Sue, I want to welcome you to A Tribe Called Dhillon podcast. I'm Angie Dhillon.
And I'm Rose Dhillon.
And I'm Alvin Dhillon.
And I just want to absolutely. And I just want to confirm you're a licensed clinical psychologist at Stanford University and also author of the Healing Trauma Workbook for Asians American. Is that correct? Perfect. And can I get you to tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into this line of work, psychology?
Yeah. I think my great loves were writing, dancing, and just being interested in people my whole life. And this one seemed somewhat more practical for a career perspective. But psychology was really the one area of study where I never got bored. And that I actually felt I was doing something useful and helpful for people. So that I realized is a sweet spot. Like sometimes people make money, but they don't feel great about what they do, or vice versa. So I've been very lucky to be in a field of work that is very much about helping people to find their own strengths and heal. It's kind of a misunderstanding. People think that it's therapists that heals people. It's really like we're just guides for that process. And I've been doing it now for more than 20 years.
Wow. Well, you look like 20 yourself, so that's amazing. You're going to have to tell us you're going to have to tell us some of your beauty secrets afterwards, because you look 20 yourself like you're going to university.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I had a question, Dr. Sue. What's your take on the use of psychedelics and healing trauma? Because it's been obviously just on the forefront and new to mainstream media, but I think other cultures and religions have been using it for quite some time. What's your take on that?
I think it can be quite powerful. I've certainly known people who have been trained in it and also receiving and again, if you look at ancient wisdom, that cultures around the world have had different rituals. And that's kind of the key, right? As, for example, a Jewish friend once talked about they would use alcohol, but in a very specific way, sort of controlled, contained, purposeful, right? People have ceremonies with peyote in a very guided way. And so it has been something that's existed for a long time. How do we use mind altering substances in a way that can open us up, but we're in a safe place and we're being guided by somebody? And I think that can be really amazing. A colleague who is trained in it, part of her training was also undergoing the experience herself, and said it just really helped move away so much defensiveness, really helped access some deep grief from losing a parent when they were quite young. And that's the other thing too, is when we're younger, we don't have the same intellectual and language capacity to process. So sometimes we process stuff again when we're older. And that's natural. Sometimes people will feel like a failure, like, I thought I was over this. And it's like, no, this is natural. Your brain is different now. So it can be wonderful. I know there's a lot of research about it and figuring out safety, because that's important. Because one of my concerns is if you have any underlying, for example, genetic propensity for certain mental health disorders like psychosis, then that would not be advisable. So knowing how to screen for what's advisable and then making sure you're in a good space. I had one of my students went to a very fancy place where it's administer psychedelic. There's literally 2 therapists in the room as a guide the whole time. Where I've had other people say, yeah, I just took this and ran around on the beach all night and cried for 5 hours. And I'm like, okay, maybe not so safe, So yeah, I think used well, it can be really helpful.
Awesome.
Dr. Sue, what is your advice for someone like me? And these two are going to laugh as I ask you this question. I am very military with my emotions. It's like, what do you mean? You had a weak moment. What are you talking about? And I need to work on empathy and being more compassionate. What do you say to people like me, and how do I hone in that and that ability of holding space for people and really listening and understanding, and as opposed to going in that military, I've been there, I've done this, and you know what, you need to buck up, princess, and life goes on. This is life. I don't like that when I do that sometimes, and I do that with these two, and not trying to be judgmental or condescending, but when these two run off to do psychedelics, I'm like, God damn, I've gone through so much trauma. I have so much trauma. I don't see me doing any of that, but that's wrong. So how can someone like me, those people out there that are very military, how can we build on compassion and empathy? Can you help me?
It's a process everything we do for ourselves is also what we do for others. And so there's one piece, right? It's like, so some people, for example, have an easier time showing care, compassion, empathy for others than they do for themselves, and others are vice versa. But compassion and grace is something that serves us well in both for the people around us as well as for ourselves. Because, and I joke around with my clients, but it's true. I'm like, well, I know what it's like to be raised in a culture where stoicism was prized. We were so proud of the fact that we never took vacations and we never took sick days. And like, we're so tough. Which later, finally, when I was in grad school, my body just was like, well, screw this, and I started getting quite ill, and was just like angry at my body. Like, why, can't I push through? And really, it led me down a path too of like, your body is not your enemy. It is trying to tell you things. Emotions are not your enemy. Emotions give you data. They give you truth. And there's something you're supposed to learn from whatever it's trying to tell you. And our job is to figure out what is that. So I think we waste a lot of time fighting or squashing emotions instead of learning, like, what am I supposed to learn here? I think that lifelong learning perspective is helpful. And a more specific example, like one of the most famous classes at Stanford Business School is interpersonal communication, I believe. The students call it touchy-feely. But it's an example of these kind of skills are learnable. Most people don't do it the way they do. It can be very brutal. Like they really delve into stuff in themselves and each other. They tons of radically candid feedback and reflection. But they all say they grow quite a lot, right? That there are steps, that these are learnable skills. We all have different temperaments even since we're little, this is true. We can actually see that even in children. But we can all learn. So I'm sure we've all had a conversation, for example, with an elder that we're like, yeah, it's not so great that you do this. And they say something like, well, that's just how I am. It's like, yeah, but that's kind of like putting yourself down. You're capable of learning to do it differently or more as an option. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking about expanding your repertoire. Generally, bimodal thinking, black and white thinking, or rigid thinking is not helpful. And it's not adaptable. Right? Like they say, everyone thinks that Darwin said, oh, the strongest survive. No, he said the most adaptable survive. And how do we do that? So during pandemic, for example, we had a group and we just called it surfing uncertainty. And it was really about how do you learn to actually surf uncertainty, because it's inevitable that we're going to have things happen in life. So how do you ride them out? We can get super rigid or we can become overwhelmed, but I think there is a middle place.
Mm-hmm. It's a great explanation.
Great. And I've got something that I want to ask you here, because I had an aha moment when I was listening to one of your clips yesterday. Okay. So how much of me, the way that I am and my ability to navigate through my emotions or my lack of, how much of this comes from my programming from my parents? Because I know that there's a book titled Asian Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Dr. Lindsay Gibson.
Yeah, I saw that you talked about that. Yeah.
And I know that you spoke about that. And there was an aha moment when you said that this book actually does not highlight culture and history, which you say is where a lot of our parents' troubles come from, complex trauma, and hence it gets carried on. So can you speak a little bit about where my lack of emotional intelligence in this area comes from my folks?
It can. It's from and I don't want to say parents, our parents and their entire cultures, right? And you add that with whatever culture we're living in. So there's multiple ways that things can go awry. Right. I think sometimes if maybe we had stayed in the home country and our parents acted that way, then maybe it would have worked more effectively. But one of the challenges of multiple heritage people like Asian Americans, Asian Canadians, is this huge contrast too of messages they get at home and messages they get in the rest of the world. And then trying to do all of the above. Identity gets really confusing. Nobody can be all the things. And then many of our parents didn't have a lot of skills to model great communication, great emotional modulation, flexibility. And I remember there was a time in Fremont, the city of Fremont, I used to work for Youth and Family Services, and we had schools there that were like 90% South Asian and Chinese American. And I had gotten a grant to do parent education, including in Chinese for immigrant parents. And one of the exercises was just thinking about what are the skills of a really good communicator, a really good listener. We asked the parents to like think about who in your life really did that for you. And like one parent just started to cry and said, nobody ever listened to me. And she said, I know I'm not doing a good job with my son, but I don't know how, like nobody taught me. And so, and kudos to her for being at this class to be like, yeah, I don't know how to do this. Many of our parents pushed away the very closeness that they wanted. And I see it a lot with the parents of my students now. The parents get into rigidity and control and giving advice, which just makes their kids want to be like, ugh, And then both parties are really sad because they really do care about each other, but they're not seeing the ways that they're making each other maybe emotionally feel worse.
Motivated you to write this book, the book that you wrote? Like what happened, or I guess maybe through your practice or seeing things that you felt like, I know I need to put this in pen. I need to get this out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I do like self-help workbooks. So my publisher, New Harbinger, has been around, I think, like 50 years. So I've always known about their books. I've often recommended their books to clients, just like the Adult Children of Emotionally Mature Parents books. And after a while, it was like, these are good books. And clients would say, this is a good book, but it says nothing about the extreme levels of like emotional obligation, say in an Asian family, or the extraordinary traumas that some of our ancestors have made, or about colonialism, or about racism, or colorism, casteism, gender bias. Like it was sort of one dimensional. So it's like, yeah, it's kind of helpful, but where are we? Where's our experience in this? So I thought about it for years, like it would be really great to have a guide. And I knew I wanted to write a workbook. A lot of my friends are like accomplished academics, and I've written some academic chapters, but it became really clear to me that doesn't really help normal people. Like I knew I wanted to write a workbook that would be accessible for a normal audience who doesn't have special training. And also because realistically, I know a lot of Asian Americans are never going to go to therapy. They are unwilling, or they can't afford it, or they can't find an Asian American therapist. But at least maybe this is a tool that they could use in the privacy of their own home.
Wow. That's amazing. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
We can speak to you for hours.
I know.
I know we're coming to time, but yeah, it's, even for me, the wheels are now turning. I'm like,
me too.
Yeah, this is great.
As you were talking, I just started thinking in my head, and then I just kind of like drift off into thought.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you said post-traumatic growth.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, post-traumatic, like my wheels just went off. Like my things. I'm actually, maybe for our viewers, could you kind of tell people what that actually entails? Because I think I have a little understanding, but you're the professional. I'd rather get you to explain that.
Yeah, I like the term post-traumatic growth better than the more vague term. Sometimes people will say like resilience or grit, because sometimes resilience or grit can be a little bit like, again, we're just going to like paper over stuff. Just be tough. Whereas post-traumatic growth really describes that there's an incredibly often grueling process of healing, but that it can be opportunities for growth, that many trauma survivors will talk about things like having a totally renewed sense of like purpose or meaning or relationships or self-efficacy, just things that they wouldn't have chosen to go through that process, but they have managed to take from it something that was growth. And I think that that kind of healing is something generationally that we are just now really studying. I'll never forget meeting the therapist Esther Perel, who talked about growing up in a place full of Holocaust survivors. And her comment was, of the survivors, some just survived and some came back to life. And there is a difference. And I learned so much working with refugee survivors, mostly Southeast Asian survivors, when I worked in Oakland, Chinatown. So Lao, Hmong, Cambodian, Mien people who had been through things I cannot possibly even imagine, and were plagued by many issues and intergenerational issues. Lots of substance abuse, severe PTSD, and some did find ways to come back to life. And I think everyone has that potential if they get the right sort of supports and resources.
Mm-hmm. So in closing, Dr. Sue,
wow. Yeah.
Our traumas can be healed. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, our natural state is to heal. And that's a really wonderful thing. If we create the right conditions, the natural drive of our bodies is to heal, and our minds.
Oh, I love that.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Do either of you have any more questions? I know we're approaching time, and we'll have to get you back on again.
Yeah,
this is just
amazing.
So good. And for our listeners, how can they get access to your book if they want to, listen to you or speak, or do you do any conferences? How can we get your information out to more and more people?
Yeah, I'm at a lot of my nerdy psychological conferences. The next one coming up is an Asian American Psychological Convention in October. This year's in Atlanta, but my YouTube channel and Instagram is Hella Mental Health. Hella is a very Northern California phrase. And that's probably the best place. And on YouTube, I take comments too when people ask about, topics that they want to talk about. Like I said, the response to the pet grief video has been so huge that I definitely realize that's an area we should talk more about. Yes, and the book is on
We'll put your links, and we'll put your book below too.
Yeah,
we'll put all of your information. We just want to say, Dr. Helen Sue, thank you so much for your time and taking time and educating us and talking to us. I just feel for me now, I'm like, oh, there's hope. Okay, this old bird can be healed a little bit.
The siblings, there's hope.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing on behalf of us.
I was like, there's hope for us.
Yeah, and I just love that you said that our natural state is healing. That's so awesome. Powerful that I think our viewers are going to love that. Like that, amazing. That's our natural state.
Yeah. What we say, clean the wound, nourish yourself, and you create the conditions to heal. But thank you all. For being so authentic with your processes too. I think that is a huge part of what heals our communities, is to not keep secrets and to be really open about how complicated life is.
Well, thank you. That's actually one of the reasons, Dr. Sue, why we started the podcast, is we just found, like you said, in our culture, everything is stoic. We will let the world think we have a perfect life, perfect house, the Mercedes, the Range Rover, and inside our entire world is falling apart. And we Band-Aid things. And I just said, I don't want the next generation to be like this. One of us has, our generation has to set up the next generation for success. And, whether we go through a divorce, there's a running joke I always say to my sister, I'm like, we're two sisters divorced from the same family. God, what shame we brought to our parents. But how many other Angies and Roses are out there? And we have to talk about this stuff and normalize it now in society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to let the next generation know, actually, you have a lot of options and choices to still have a nice life. I think that's an important thing too.
Yes.
It doesn't always go to plan A, and we can mourn that, but that doesn't mean plan B, C, or D is terrible.
Mm-hmm. Love that.
Absolutely.
I'm in plan B. That's exactly what I love that you said that. Yeah.
We're just learning out loud with everybody and just sharing what we learn along the way. And don't do this, don't do that.
Yeah.
And as a guy, I've learned that, holding it in doesn't work. Because if you hold it in, you're putting something in to kind of block that. And you actually have to let it out and just put it out there. And then I think that's how the healing starts, because I think the way I was doing it before clearly wasn't working. So the new way seems to be working a little better.
Yeah. We're good.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sue. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah. And we will connect with you soon. Thank you very much.
Take good care.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Bye.